Committee of the Whole is called back to order. My colleagues, please be mindful, we're on the third round, which is reference to your comments or amendments. If you don't have your amendments in, please get them in by the time we get to you. Senator Moylan, you're first. Do you have any comments or amendments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No comments, no amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Torres, do you have any comments or amendments to Bill 230-36 LS?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any comments, but I just want, the only comment that I have actually was to help correct the record because there were some statements made about the budget and the appropriation of excess funds, and so I think that we need to be sure that we're clear, you know, what is true about the budget. And one, for example, was the set aside for the rainy day fund, and I just want to put on the record that, in fact, that portion of the budget, there is a provision, but then it's also backed out, so there's no mandatory deposit into the rainy day fund per our budget act that we passed. So that was just one thing that I want to clear up that was erroneously stated yesterday on the record and needs to be cleared up. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Madam Speaker, do you have any comments or amendments?
I do have amendments. I think they've been submitted, but they're not passed out yet. So if we could pass on me, come back to when they're passed out on the floor. I don't see them on my desk.
Let's take a quick recess. Reminder, colleagues, get your amendments in, because once we get to you, once we pass you, we don't go back to you. We continue on with everybody else. Quick recess. The amendment's being uploaded.
The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. We are on Bill number 230-36, the last round of comments and amendments. We are still on Speaker Terlahi amendments. Speaker, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In general on the bill, I'd just like to comment that, with my colleagues and, with the lead of the Vice Speaker, the legislature acted swiftly to implement a local program and has done everything in its power to ensure that this program remains on course, a local war claims program for those who miss the federal deadline. And we have urged the administration to implement this program swiftly under the parameters set by the legislature. We even identified a funding source, which was supposed to be transfer authority from current appropriations, so that we will stay within our budget, our levels of what we anticipated just a few months ago as to what our revenues would be, and that we urge savings in all the agencies. And the administration was completely on board and said they would do that, and signed 2 bills, in fact, with that as a funding source. But we are here today because of a bill sent down by the governor for implementation of the program with some of the parameters a little bit different than what the legislature had said. And so we are considering those, and we'll probably, adopt a bill that will allow some of those parameters to be extended or put in place. And we're also considering the largest part of it is the funding source. And so I'd like to just finesse that a little bit more. And but I'll begin with my amendments. So the first amendment that was passed out adds, it's on line 5 to 6 on page 1. Please ignore that. I'm not going to do that amendment on legal's advice, not necessary. It was just to add the words who were eligible, so please ignore that amendment. So my first amendment is on lines 19 to 25, page 5, filing period for claims and notice. So the original bill that we passed, setting up the program, did not put a filing deadline, and we've had lots of discussion about the filing deadline. And then the bill from the governor set the filing deadline at 3 months. The committee came out with a filing deadline for 12 months, which I appreciate, but I'm proposing to amend the bill to remove that filing deadline, because in the next provision of the bill, it said that the adjudication committee shall publish a notice of the deadline for filing a claim. And since they have to publish the deadline, it's my proposal to let them decide the deadlines. And if they can, just in case they need to extend the deadline, that they don't need to come back for legislative authority to do that if they feel like there wasn't enough applicants submitted or something like that. But in any event, setting a 12-month deadline and then telling them they shall publish a notice of the deadline, it's kind of duplicative. It doesn't give them any leeway to decide deadlines. And as Mr. Byrne talked to us about the deadlines, we want these applications in so that we can, because we have to pay out those who are living. Sorry.
Excuse me, Speaker.
Yes.
Can you read out the name of your amendment to ensure that we're all following along the correct one?
Sure. It's AS Bill 230 TMT L19-25 P5.
That's line 19 to 25, page 5.
Yes, it's to amend section 13.303.
Thank you, Speaker. Please proceed.
Okay, so the amendment is to delete section A and to allow the adjudication committee to set the deadline. They can set it for 12 months, but they can also allow an extension if they see it necessary. They might also have to bifurcate the deadlines, because we want all claims to be submitted, but we can't pay those who died, decedents, during the war, until we have paid all of the the other claimants. That's the way the law is set up. And so, I don't know, I'm just thinking to give the committee that type of leeway in this process. And that's my amendment, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Speaker. On the amendment, line 19 to 25, page 5, Senator Brown, followed by Senator San Augustine.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. If the sponsor of the amendment would, I just wanted to relay and then just ask for a response. I mean, I understand the one-year deadline can be looked at as unreasonable. Certainly, we went through the process, the federal process of that timeline, and found that obviously there were members in our community that may have not been aware or had the assistance to be able to file within the one-year deadline. So I can understand that. I'm not entirely comfortable with the idea of leaving it open-ended, simply because we're going to allow them to go on for how long? I mean, even though I understand, you know, there's a timeline to all of us, but I just, the idea of leaving it totally open-ended, I'd rather have some process where the Commission can come back and give us updates so that we know where their progress is, rather than simply leaving it open-ended and maybe they get around to completing, maybe they don't. This is a very specific task that this commission is being put in place to accomplish, and I just don't like the idea of totally open-ended. I would like a timeline put. If it's not 1 year, then 2 years, or a status report, and then the legislature can come back and determine. I mean, I don't know why the legislature seems to be so perturbed about the idea of having to have these issues come back. I think they should come back for public accounting and reporting, so that there is, as I mentioned, you know, accounting of that process publicly, so that we do know where things are at. Maybe put a timeline for the commission itself to come back and give us a status report, and then from there the legislature can determine, does it want to allow another year or whatever the case may be, because I'm sure the survivors, the remaining survivors, once they're made aware of this or can have the assistance to facilitate their application, will want to put it in place. But this whole idea of just leaving it open-ended and, you know, we'll see that they get around to it, I just don't, that doesn't give me any comfort level. So I just want to get feedback from the speaker, perhaps maybe put a reporting period back for the commission to publicly report, and then the legislature can determine how much longer upon that, you know, feedback should they extend the timeline. This open-ended whenever thing just doesn't give me any comfort level, so I wanted to ask if the sponsor of the amendment could yield to that question.
Speaker Terlahi, do you yield to the question?
Sure, I'll yield to that question. First of all, I don't believe it's in anyone's interest to leave it open-ended, and the committee is mandated to put a deadline. So it will not be open-ended by mandate of this section. They shall publish a deadline. There will be a concrete deadline published, and it's in their interest to abide by that deadline, because if they don't get all the claims in and pay the survivors, they will never be able to pay the decedents, because the law locks up payment to the decedents until all survivors have been paid. And so that's why it's very much, you know, in the interest of this committee to wrap it up, but not, you know, but the other side of that is, if they get a poor response, or if there's still money available, there's no harm in them opening up the deadline again. But I can't see why they would, you know, make it cannot be open-ended. There's just no way that can happen with the way the statute's written. There has to be a deadline. First of all, it has to be published within 30 days, and the deadline has to make a cutoff so that we can finally get to decedents, those who died during the war, and not just the survivors, you know, after the war. That's mandatory. The other part is the reporting. We can put that in. I don't see the need for it personally, because if anybody thinks this is not going to be one of the most reported things coming up in the next fiscal year or during our fiscal year, you know, I don't see that. I think the news is going to follow this every single week. They're going to have that committee accounting for every single meeting. How many claims did you adjudicate? And how, you know, how much money did you spend? And I think, you know, I have no doubt that is going to happen. But, you know, I don't object to anyone else putting in a reporting requirement, but the reporting requirement is really not relevant to this section. This is just when can they file claims? And I'm just allowing the committee to establish that. They've seen the legislature wants 12 months. I agree with 12 months, and so, you know, we've heard Mr. Byrne, he doesn't object to 12 months. And so I just don't want them to be tied to that in case there were claimants who were not able to file, or there's still additional money left at the end.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I think we want to get all the remaining survivors. And again, we're working against time. That was our enemy at the very beginning because it's taken so long to address this issue. So I certainly want to ensure that every eligible claimant has the ability to file. But again, we can add another amendment into the bill that would require reporting requirements so that public officials that are, you know, entrusted with these responsibilities certainly can have a status review of where we're at. I like the media that they're out there, but they're not the public officials that have been elected by the people to oversee this issue. So certainly I'll look at making an amendment to that. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to ask a question and comment on this
Thank you very
amendment.
much, Senator Brown. Senator San Augustine, followed by Senator Titlequee. Senator San Augustine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, and as the committee chair that made the amendments on this bill to make it 12 months is a result of the public hearing. The result of one of my colleagues that asked that exactly what the previous speaker mentioned, it's open-ended. We're going right back to where we started before the public hearing, and that's why the public hearing resulted in the amendment to add the 12 months. If anything, this amendment should have included no less than 12 months or something. There's got to be a number of days. As much as the author feels that no, it's not, it is. This could go on for years. And it doesn't need to go on for years because we still need to take care of the other group that needs to be entertained. So I would object to this amendment until there's additional verbiage put in there to fix it, to make sure that we get this wrapped up, because the survivors are waiting to get paid. The families of descendants are waiting to be addressed. And every day we delay is a day that we caused it. We can't blame the administration. Administration gave us a copy of what their rules they believe they should be. We made the amendments. They were in support of it. Now we're going to make the reasons to say that no, we just want to make it 30 days. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Senator Titlequee, you are recognized.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to my colleagues. Madam Chair, when we had the public hearing on the first bill on 2:30, I think it was, and then we did another public hearing on it, at both times, I brought up the fact that, two things. One, that we should have a deadline, and two, that we should follow the same procedures that were followed prior to this legislation, or how the adjudication process was happening with those who received payment already, who met the deadline. So what we're doing is reopening to allow those individuals who missed it the same opportunity again as those who was allowed for a year to process their claims. It was a year. It would be very unfair for those who were on time, who submitted their documents on time, who met the deadline, that they weren't availed to a longer period of time to file their claims. I think what we want to do here is to provide that same process that was given to those earlier, to those who missed it. I don't think it should be more, definitely not less. But I brought it up during that public hearing to at least put a deadline, and that deadline mirrors what happened prior in the adjudication of the war claims of those who made the deadline. So, I just feel that we should be fair and keep the same process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titlegy. On the amendment, Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this amendment really speaks to the spirit of this whole law, or Law 36-62. I mean, the whole reason why we're here is because there was a missed deadline. And for whatever reason, we don't know the conditions or what happened for them to miss the deadline. And if we're going to put a hard deadline, to me, it's arbitrary. This 12-month is arbitrary because we're basing it on what we perceive to be an adequate amount of time. I would like to now proffer an amendment, perhaps, to address the concerns. So it's being uploaded, it's being created right now. If I can ask for a moment recess.
This is an amendment to the amendment?
Yes, it is.
We'll take a minute recess.
Okay, thank you.
The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. Senator Perez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the body for offering this time to do an amendment. But I do have a separate amendment, so I'll disregard the amendment to the amendment at this time. But I do rise in support of this amendment. The intent of it is in line with the law itself in ensuring that all claimants of war claims is able to avail themselves of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perez. On the Terlahi amendment. There has been an objection to the amendment. Speaker Terlahi, would you like to close?
Yes, I would, Madam Chair, and if I could beg the indulgence of my colleagues, just want to very carefully show the intent of this amendment. I agree, there should not be an arbitrary deadline. We objected to that, and it's why we created the program altogether. It's because we objected that the federal government has set a one-year deadline, and our Manamco were not able to meet that deadline. So we are, out of compassion, out of sense of justice, because we still have survivors, unpaid survivors who are passing every day, we have to balance this sense of urgency that we have to pay these claims immediately, and a sense of compassion and the ability of the government to get the word out and the Manamco to get their applications in. We're balancing those things. And so the original law that we passed authorizing the program set no deadline. This bill would put a 12-month deadline, which is much better than a 3-month deadline, but I'm suggesting that we combine the two interests that are competing here. One is a 3-month deadline is great because then we will have ended it and we can pay category 2. And I want to point out what I'm talking about by categories. There are 2 categories of people to be paid. The first is compensable Guam victims. And on page 3 of the bill, it says, before making any payments under subsection A2 of this section, the director shall make payments to compensable Guam victims. That's category 1. They're going to get paid first. So you go to page 4 of the bill, subsection 2 of subsection A. It says the director shall make payments under this subsection only after all payments have been made under subsection A1 of this section. That's what I call category 2. And that's what I'm worried about, is I don't want category 2 people to wait for 1 year. If they've put in their claims, I would like to pay them before the end of the year. After all, we've put in 2 sources of funding. The money will be there, available, and it should be used. And so this is what the federal program did. It set that category 2 payments out only until category 1 was first all paid. Maybe they were worried about running out of money, not sure their intention, but I have no objection to doing that, but I want to give this committee the ability to be very strategic. And if they can set a deadline, for example, earlier than a year, then they can pay out category 1, all along, and they can pay out category 2 at the end of that deadline, right? And then if they can, extend that deadline, they will have another opportunity to pay again category 1, anything that comes in after the first deadline, and again category 2 without waiting all the way to the end of a year. And that's really all. And it's just to give them, they might not decide to do it that way, but it gives them the opportunity to be very strategic about it and to allow payments for both categories earlier than a year. Otherwise, I would have no objection to, extending the deadline 1 year, 2 years. It's in their interest to have an ending period because if without an ending period, they will not get to category 2. So they're going to set an ending period for sure. They have to do that within 30 days. My amendment in no way sets the filing deadline at 30 days. It does not do that. It says they will announce the deadline in 30 days. That's all. That's the bill. That's not my amendment. So the deadline is mandatory. But through my amendment, I'm hoping the adjudication committee will clearly will have the flexibility to set the deadline, as necessary to pay out both categories promptly, to bring justice to both sets, to both groups, and to address the survivors who are passing, and all of the interests that we all share, and the urgency and the compassion. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. There has been an objection to the Terlahi amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Amendment fails. Speaker Terlahi, you are still recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My next amendment, I think is, I don't have one that has a title on it. Wait. But it's the appropriation language, so it's line 18 to 21 on page 7. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so the title is TMT line 18 to 21, page 7. This is to amend subsection B of the appropriation part of the bill, and as we know, so in our previous law, we said that the funding source is transfer authority. We had encouraged the governor to find savings in the agencies, which she was able to do in order to make the law enforcement pay, and that she had said that they would be able to do, and she passed this bill twice, that she agreed to that funding source. We've also, in this new bill, we are extending that funding sources to also include the general fund. So I am proposing that we be very specific about our appropriation and that we narrow it down to, instead of just simply general fund, to the FY 2021 general fund revenues collected in excess of the adopted FY 2021 revenues, and that this be appropriated specifically to the Guam War Claims Fund, that fund that we have established in the past that has restrictions placed on it, which include that the fund shall be exempt from the governor's transfer authority, and any funds remaining shall be subject to legislative appropriation. Again, we have no idea how much this program is going to cost, and we are trying to ensure that we, through transfer authority and through appropriation of $10 million from general fund, that we are going to have enough to cover the claims. The FY21 excess revenues are the exact source that has been listed in all of the fiscal notes for the prior bills and recent bills that we've considered. So of course, we went through the accounting yesterday, and they show that there are potentially $62 million in excess FY21 funds. They must account for the $20 million deficit in special funds. They have to account for $1.5 million in continuing cumulative deficit for the 2020 audited financial statement, and they have to account for $20 million of tax refunds in adjusted revenues that they did not account for in their CRER. That's supposed to be going towards tax refunds. And now the war claims. And so I think if we specifically state this, then we won't be getting those vague answers from the administration as to what is the funding source, what is the balance left. We will be able for ourselves to very clearly account for how the FY21 excess are being spent, and hopefully, as we go forward, account for any additional revenues we receive in FY22. Again, this is a secure source of funds. The money is supposedly there. It should be available today if it's not spent without any authority by the legislature. And so that's why I'm proposing that we make it very specific. And I just want to clarify for the record, after we adjourned yesterday or recessed, Mr. Byrne clarified off the record that there is no 50 million available in the CRER for FY22. There was only the 35. And we did the accounting on the 35 yesterday, on the FY22, and those are, potential, of course, that we're looking at for FY22, based on, anyways, that's not as secure as this one. FY21, secure, it's been accounted for in their own fiscal notes, and so hopefully my language is clear that this will be the specific funding source. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Speaker Terlahi. On the amendment, Senator Dueñas, you are recognized.
Sorry, could I just add, and this amendment I'd like to say is sponsored by myself and Senator Dueñas, co-sponsor.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Senator Dueñas.
Masi, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Speaker. I certainly rise in full support of this amendment. Madam Chair, yesterday, as we were discussing with Director Byrne about funding sources and going over that section that seemed to have been on the minds of a lot of our colleagues in terms of the funding source, I once again, kind of memorialized the beginning of these payouts, and that this legislature did step forward in the 35th and ensure that there would be the mechanism to jumpstart the process. But it has always been the intent, I believe, of this body, Madam Chair, to have the Section 30 funding source. In light of the fact that we are paying ourselves, and we've made that statement a number of different times, I just think it continues to be appropriate to use that funding source. Maybe someday we can prevail on our national government to recognize that this was an obligation due at that level. And of course, the history of this proposal to make right by our people and those that suffered the atrocities of the war, to be compensated and have some sort of dignity and some sort of recognition. It's contained in the actual name of the account, Madam Chair, and I'm glad that we also did it that way. I'm sure Department of Administration is going to have no problem utilizing that account. It's identified in the Section A of this area of the bill. And I guess also, Madam Chair, maybe an attempt at humor yesterday on my discussion in the past with BBMR on whenever there is a number of different competing interests, if you will, in certain accounts in the government of Guam. I remembered a number of different appropriations in the past to the Tourism Attraction Fund. And, it was always said to me from BBMR when they recognize these kind of issues, it's first in, first out. Well, I hope this is the first. Knowing that this funding source is solid. We had a lot of discussion yesterday, Madam Chair, too, that, and I'm glad, the constant discussion on how over the years now, starting with the previous administration, that tax refunds are absolutely at the top, and at the forefront now. Many in this body, even in our last appropriation, the good Speaker and others have made sure that that's absolutely a priority. But we've also known, Madam Chair, over the years, it really is Section 30 that has basically accounted for whatever the obligations due by the government of Guam, are taken care of. A lot of times that does end up being the balance of tax refunds that are due. It ensures that we can meet deadlines according to the court order and the like. So I just once again think that this is the way to go, and this is the way also I think that is appropriate based on what this legislature had set forth, and it establishes that there is an account that this comes from. It's not just the general fund. That is accountability to the people of Guam. It's accountability to our priorities. And it's accountability, Madam Chair, that when the money comes from this area, then it is up to the administration to have to utilize their resources wisely. And then in the eventuality that there are any other needs, come back to this body as we also discussed in any proposed projected excess revenues, that there would be an appropriation authority required. So I just think that this meets all of those parameters, Madam Chair, and I think it sets aside some of our concerns with this bill in terms of funding source. So with that, Madam Chair, Sidus Masi once again for the opportunity to rise in full support of this amendment.
Thank you very much, Senator Dueñas. On the amendment, Senator Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have a total different view on this, and I've mentioned it time and time again with regards to public comments and certainly during the public hearing. You know, we talk about recognition, but recognition from who to who? This whole process of us paying reparations to ourselves is very disturbing to me. It's very disturbing to me because this is something that is an obligation for so many years and for so many that have come before us that have sought and have worked very hard to have the federal government acknowledge the atrocities that were brought upon our people. And for us to sit here and debate this issue and say, well, you know, they'll figure it out and figure out how to pay tax refunds and I'm at a loss. And I've worked with the previous Reparations Commission that staffed war survivors like Beatrice Emsley, like Tootin Pete Cruz, who was one of the defenders here at the plaza, the late Mayor Vicente Bernardo, who's one of the longest serving mayors in the history of Guam, who was a war survivor, to go to the halls of Congress to present their story and what they suffered during the war. And I feel we need to tie this issue, as was the original federal language, to the Section 30 funds, because that unfortunately ended up becoming the source, which we all argue, well, it's money intended for Guam anyway. But I'd rather have it come from federal hands to our people and have a direct line of connection than to take local revenue that's intended for our people for other critical needs in this government. Now, we can appropriate left and right at this moment because, oh my goodness, the money's falling from the sky. Uncle Sam's just put it out in the air and we're just grabbing it left and right. The time's going to come not too far down the road if something doesn't shift that we're not going to be able to pay for the obligations of this government, including the obligations the governor now continues to add on without legislative concurrence and continues to add on the backs of our people. So colleagues, let's not kid ourselves that we are the ones who are now going to resolve the issue and take away the burden of the pain that's been inflicted upon our people because we're here doing some real heavy lifting here by taking money out of our people's pockets and giving it back to them. This is a federal obligation. We should connect it to a federal source of funding. Because really, is this what this whole issue of reparations is about? The victims are paying themselves? Where do we find that? How can that be justice? How can that be proper recognition of the suffering of our people? Yes, Senator, close your ears. Because I'm talking to the people of Guam out there. This would have been unheard of in any of the previous commissions, any of the previous public officials that have fought to get reparations for our people, including those that were victims of the war, including all those many that went out there and paid to hire an attorney to bring this case to the federal government. But colleagues, to do this and make this be the source and pat ourselves on the back and then say, oh my gosh, we did it for you, my dear people of Guam. This is a moral injustice. And by all means, we should connect this. We get Section 30 funding every single year. We should use that as a source. At least it comes from federal hands to our people, but not to take the money of our own people and give it back to them. That's the issue that I have with this whole process. And somehow we think we're doing something great and grand for our people and pat ourselves on the back. This is not justice. This is not proper recognition because our people did not do this to themselves. They should not be the ones to pick up the tab for it. Where is this even heard of? So with that, Madam Chair, I certainly do object to the language that's been included here. Unless we tie it to Section 30 funds, I certainly cannot support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the amendment, On the amendment, Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, as I read the amendment, I had no objections to the part that says revenue collected in excess of the adopted budget. But I also support exactly what my colleague, previous speaker, mentioned. If it was related to revenues collected in excess of the adopted budget but reimbursed by Section 30 money in 2023 that has not been obligated yet, I can support that one. But to go back and say, let's use FY 2021. Yesterday we did the math, and I'm still trying to figure out the math that we're talking about. We said 20 million was for tax refund. We have to remind ourselves that 25 million was for the LEAP program. And it was stated that 20 million alone is for the shortfall in special funds. That's funded by the general fund. And it was very clear that if we paid attention to what we were discussing yesterday, we kept identifying that there was short. There's not enough money in the surplus, so-called surplus funds. And that won't be identified yet until the audit is done to confirm the 62 million. But at the same token, it was also revealed yesterday that we are collecting more than we normally would collect. So if we were to say revenues collected in excess of the adopted budget, that could work. But it's got to have the caveat of, and reimbursed by Section 30 money of 2023. Then it works hand in hand. Other than that, I'd have to object to this amendment, only because we did the math yesterday, and because the verbiage doesn't. You're tying in something that's already accounted for, and if this amendment was to pass, then we're saying we don't want to replenish the special funds that were short in 21. So the agencies that are short, we don't want to give them the 20 million that they could use to make sure they're whole or in some form financially sound with the shortfall. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator San Augustine. On the amendment, Senator Teichler, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We talk about doing the numbers and calculating the numbers. So let me share with my colleagues about calculating the numbers. In the budget bill for 2022, we have a law a section that we put in place that takes any excess revenue shall be deposited as follows. 70% shall be of such excess revenue shall be deposited in income tax refund, and 30% shall be excess revenue, shall be deposited in the rainy day fund. So let me do the math for you. You take $62 million of excess revenue that the administration keeps saying that we have. You take 70% of the 62 million, you come up with 43 million for tax refunds. And then 30% of 62 million is 18,600,000. That goes into the rainy day. That's a total of 62 million. If I'm not mistaken, we actually only appropriated $150 million for tax refunds. Then we put in the budget law that 20 million shall be dedicated, any excess revenue shall be dedicated to tax refunds. That's 20 million. That's a total of 135 million. Then you take the 70% that we said we would set aside for tax refunds from any excess revenue in FY21. You come up to 43 million, and you add that all together. You come up with 178 million. I was talking to the OPA recently, and he says, why is it that the legislature only appropriates for many years only 25 million for tax refunds, when every year we pay more than that out in tax refunds? Closer to 165 million is what we pay in tax refunds. And that's what we were doing in this budget bill, to ensure that tax refunds were being paid. But like I said, if you do the math on all this, with the refunds that we set aside for 2022, the 20 million that we also locked box for tax refunds in the budget bill, and then the 70% rainy day fund, you come up to 178 million. So if you subtract that, you have about subtract the 165, which is more realistic to what we pay in tax refunds, that we should set aside, you have 13 million left over. That's the math. I'm not even talking about all the legislation that was introduced using that money. First, it started out using EITC, and now we're changing over to excess revenue. The problem with this body is that we don't have a plan. We're just spending left and right. Now, we have an obligation that we all voted in the 35th to move forward, and then another bill that we put together to pay for these war claims of those people who missed the deadline. And I voted for that bill, like many of us. But I truly believe, too, that it should be money from Section 30, the same funding that was paid to those who filed their claims. That's where it came from. Madam Chair, at this point, it's very confusing, because when Mr. Burns said that whatever goes into the general fund is general fund money, that means Section 30 money goes into the general fund, it's general fund money. Taxes that are paid are general fund money. It's all general fund money. So if that's the case, then at least let's indicate somewhere in here, Section 30, that we as a body is using that money to pay out these claims. Let's bring dignity to our people. Let's incorporate that language. Madam Chair, if I could take a short recess to incorporate an amendment to include that, I'd greatly appreciate it.
We'll take a moment to recess. Sorry, before we recess, Senator San Augustine,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for point of information for my colleagues.
please state your point of information.
The point of information is a reference to the Budget Act that our colleague has identified, the 70 and 30. If you look on the next paragraph of the Budget Act, the rainy day fund was suspended by this body. I'm having copies printed, and I will provide everyone a copy. Thank you.
Citizen Masi, Senator San Augustine, we are in recess for 1 minute. The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. Again, we are still on Substitute Bill number 230-36, and we are on the Terlaje Dueñas Amendment to line 18 to 21, page 7. We are still awaiting an amendment to the amendment, and so we will recess until 2 p.m. today.